It's been less than a week since the U.S. and the Trump administration captured Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. And so far, the conversation has been largely about morality, viewing what's happening through a very domestic lens. In other words, questions like, is this okay or not? Is it moral or not? Is this the U.S. being a bully? Is this more imperialism? Is it okay that Trump did this? Is it bad that Trump did this? Everything is revolving around the U.S. and what the U.S. did. But here's the thing. This is a response that the U.S. is having to something that's happening geopolitically. This is not a domestic issue. It's a geopolitical issue that the media believes is just too complex for you to understand. Here's why that matters. Okay, here's something that you should just be aware of right off the bat. Agenda setting. Agenda setting is a media theory where news outlets influence what the public thinks about. Essentially, it's just the issues the news media chooses to cover. At a very basic level, it sets the tone for what the discourse will be about any particular topic. Now, as an American that lives within the media ecosystem and consumes American media, and that includes legacy media, but also social media, I can tell you this one thing. Americans love to talk about themselves. We love to view things that are happening through a very domestic lens. So therefore, when things are happening, we view it through Democrat versus Republican, left versus right, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. And because of that, we have a huge blind spot to things that are happening on a global scale. Now, I'm not an expert in geopolitics, so I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I found a few clips that can help us both kind of zoom out and see this from a bird's eye view. In other words, to help us see what's happening on the global scale, rather than through a domestic American lens. Now, Daniel Martino is a Venezuelan economist, writer, and activist, and was asked specifically about this question of what's happening. Here's what he had to say.
One of the things that I think is probably under-discussed is the extent to which Venezuela is working with hostile regimes to the United States.
Absolutely. So Chavez became very good friends with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad when he was president of Iran. The Iranians are still very good allies of their current regime. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. I mean, Russia and China gave him billions and billions of loans that then they forgave. That's all to prop them up. Because for these regimes, having Venezuela there is both a platform to attack the United States, but also to bother the United States. They know that the drug trafficking kills Americans and harms the West. Why not support them? They know that Maduro and Chavez before him funded communist parties in other countries.
Okay, so just to kind of interject here, this is where it sort of sets the stage that it seems, this isn't just about the U.S. being bullies, but it seems like a response perhaps to Russia, China, and Iran's influence within Venezuela. So it seems to be a global battle. Now, Glen Beck also had an interesting take on what's happening.
I want to give you a completely, I think, different perspective on what happened in Venezuela. Let me just say this. It is not about the oil. It's not about drugs. It's not about terrorism. It's not about China. It's not about communism, Marxism, or socialism. It's about all of those things. So if anybody tells you that this is really all about the oil, just listen to them because they might have a very good point on the oil thing and go, okay, well, that's cute. But that's not all it's about.
Okay, so just to kind of quickly jump ahead to where Glenn talks a little bit more about the response that the U.S. is having is in relation to what influence has been building there in Venezuela up until now.
China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Nigeria, India, all of them know not one of them can challenge the United States. But together they can if America continues to decline. And that's what we've lived under George W. Bush, under Barack Obama, under Joe Biden, is a declining America, and they were managing the decline of America. That's why you have been taught for the last 40 years that America is not that special. It's not that great, because they need you to lose faith in America to be able to have it decline and you not to pitch a hissy fit. So they could collapse it.
Now, Glenn brings up a pretty interesting point here, which is that for the last several years, we've been, as a nation, managing a decline. Now, I'm not going to go way into that, but I do think that it's, again, if you zoom out and you view things through a geopolitical lens on a global scale rather than through a domestic lens and strictly through a morality lens, which, again, those things are important, but this is ultimately something that's happening on a global scale with global implications and for global reasons, right? Okay, now what are the stakes? So I think I found this clip here of Glenn Beck where he talks a little bit about that too.
Venezuela, Guyana, Colombia. Okay. 3 names you almost never heard anything about on cable news 5 years ago. And suddenly they're the front page priorities for Washington, D.C. and our military. What? Well, they're smuggling drugs. Well, yeah, they might be. But they're also doing a lot of other things, including, as we told you, terrorist island in Venezuela. They have Hamas and Iran in Venezuela. But whoever controls this little triangle controls the Western Hemisphere and controls the Western Hemisphere's future, its energy, its minerals, and its manufacturing independence. And Venezuela is the fulcrum, okay? It holds the largest crude reserves on Earth, and it's oil that is perfectly suited for America's Gulf Coast refineries. But China and Russia have been moving in. They're like vultures sitting there offering loans and sweetheart deals to Venezuela, and Venezuela has become more and more communist and more hostile to America.
Speaking of China, Glenn Beck is not wrong. Take a look at this article from the BBC. Trump's Venezuela raid has created chaos, and that is a risk for China. This opening sentence right here, it took just a few hours for Donald Trump to upend a relationship that China had been cultivating for decades. This opening line right here tells you everything you need to know, and this is how you can zoom out and see that this is a much bigger thing happening globally. Now, for Americans and those around the world that are watching and tuned into our news and our media, be aware of the fact that our media tends to simplify the news and view it through a very domestic lens, which means we are not getting this geopolitical part of the story, which is essentially almost the whole story, especially in this instance. Of course, there's questions about morality or about legality and about whether or not this is right or wrong. And certainly there's the topic of just humanity in general. All of that has a place in the discourse, but I would just remind you and urge you to zoom out and see that the media can cultivate a conversation around just those topics while it's missing the entire point of what's actually happening here. The U.S. is not acting to nothing. In fact, they're responding to something that has already been happening for, as BBC just pointed out, for decades. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I urge you definitely check out Glenn Beck's channel. He has a lot of really valuable information about that. And otherwise, if you're interested in zooming out and looking at the media and also culture and our relationship to it and how it affects us and helps shape our worldview and our belief system and how we can kind of challenge that, then please stick around, subscribe to my channel because there's going to be a lot more videos coming up.